Snapping out of a daydream of a warm, lush field, Thor finds himself surrounded by corpses. It's the Battle of Urungawag 987 AD. Multiple longships battle on the raging sea. Thor and his comrade Thorkel brutally cut down countless enemy forces. Thor tells Thorkel he's going ahead to stop the enemy, slaughtering everyone that comes his way. Suddenly he gets distracted, and an arrow hits his shoulder. He wrestles with a soldier. Both fall into the sea. Grabbing the man's sword from its hilt, Thor makes quick work of him. Now having second thoughts, Thor drops the sword. It sinks to the bottom of the sea as he swims towards land, leaving the battle without turning back in Iceland 15 years later, in 1002 AD. A young boy, Thorfinn, and his sister Ylva, Thor's children, go about their daily chores. That night, Leif Erikson tells a group of children the story of how he sailed to the new continent. They claimed it was warmer and more fertile, war-free, and slave-free. They even make friends with the natives. Receiving a headdress and a tobacco pipe as gifts, he names the new continent Vinland. That night, a frail-looking man with a collar and a broken chain trudges through the snow towards the village while shoveling snow with her father. The next morning, Ylva falls off the roof. She uncovers something buried by their front door. The man with the collar, Leif, warns Thorfinn about the danger. His ship once got stuck in an ice floe. But the ship wasn't the only thing he left behind. The whole crew perished while walking across the frozen water. Leif goes on to tell the story of how their ancestors fled King Harald after his conquest of Norway. Thorfinn refuses to believe his ancestors would run away. Rushing to ask his father about his life story, he finds Thor reviving the escaped slave. Suddenly someone bursts through the door, explaining that Halfdan has shown up at their port looking for an escaped. Barging into their home, Halfdan demands Thor return the slave, to which Thor offers to buy him instead for 4 times the amount he paid. Despite their best efforts, the slave dies. A warship sails towards the town. Thor hasn't completely let go of his past, as his equipment still sits in a chest hidden in the family's home. A Viking settlement in Northumbria, England, is attacked on November 13, 1002 AD. The English strike while they bathe, slaughtering them, sparing no one, not even the women and children. Back in Iceland, the children of the village fought with wooden weapons. Leif shows up to tell Thorfinn, who died early on during the game, that he's leaving to trade in Norway. Looking towards the horizon, Leif notices a warship approaching the village, telling Thorfinn to warn his father. They request to speak with Thor, the troll, making his way to the dock. Thor addresses the soldiers as Yams, or Vikings, and asks for their leader, Floki. Apparently, King Sweyr's sister was one of the victims, giving him a good excuse to wage war on England despite being a deserter. The leader of the Yams Vikings, Sigvail Dai, is willing to forgive Thor if he returns to Yamberg and fights in the war. If Thor refuses, however, he's forcing his hand because he jeopardizes the entire village's safety. Some of the children eavesdrop, and the older boys in the village become excited for their first chance to fight on the battlefield. Leif tells the kids that the Yams Vikings are the strongest army in the north. Returning to his ship, Floki introduces himself to the village, explaining that his task is to recruit the hero, Thor Snorrason, and anyone who chooses to follow him into battle. They will send a warship for Thor to command in the coming weeks. Despite faking his own death, he wasn't able to escape after 15 years on the run. Thorfinn beats up the village kids, injuring them while they play war. Angry that he can't sail with the others, he discards his wooden sword to look for a real blade, find the chest with Thor old gear in it. Thorfinn, mesmerized by his old dagger, doesn't notice his father until he grabs it by the blade. Thor explains that swords are for killing people, asking his son who he was going to kill. Thorfinn replies that he was going to kill the enemy. Thor tells him that he doesn't have any enemies and that no one has enemies. Thorfinn runs out of the house, calling his father a liar. Floki and his troop of Yams Vikings visit the Faroe Islands to speak with Askeladd, the leader of a group of Viking pirates. Floki offers 5 pounds of gold. All Askeladd and his men have to do is kill Thor. Askeladd wonders why Floki doesn't kill him himself, asking for double what Floki offers. Floki tries to intimidate him, claiming that Askeladd is in no position to negotiate. A spear flies into the tent, killing the Yams Viking hiding behind the tapestry, taken by surprise. Floki accepts his counteroffer. Thor decides to take only 5 of the young men from his village on the journey with him and Leif. One of the young women sending them off worries about Ori until Leif explains that they won't even see a battlefield. He plans to bring them back to the village after he finishes trading in Norway. Thor says goodbye to his family but can't find Thorfinn. He begins to tell Helga something but can't find the words. They both understand but leave it unspoken. Using a giant-sized paddle, Thor stakes one side of the ship while the 5 young men row on the other, barely able to keep up once they are far enough away to use the sails. Thor agrees that it's too late to turn back now. It takes a second before he realizes that Thorfinn was the one who asked the question. Thor is not happy, but he can't help but smile when Thorfinn jumps out of a barrel to relieve himself. Struck by the beauty of the ocean in the Faroe Islands, Askeladd and his crew prepare for the job, thinking that Floki is hiding something. This isn't an execution. It's an assassination. That night, Leif tells them to change course. Noticing the wind change, Thor tells Ori, a young suitor with a crush on Ylva, eager to become a warrior for his daughter. Thor tells him about her birth while he was still a Yams Viking and how it made him fear battle. Now that he had something to live for, he decided to leave the battlefield forever. The crew makes it to the Faroe Islands to stop, rest, and resupply as they sail through a narrow pass with cliffs on either side. Both Leif and Thor get a bad feeling. They decide to turn back before they make it out. Rubble and broken rocks careen off the side of the cliff where Askeladd's men lie in wait. They are trapped, knowing they are no match for 2 ships full of men. Thor breathes, and he retrieves his sword from the chest. He hands Thorfinn his dagger, telling him to only use it to defend himself. With that, Thor leaps onto one of their ships and starts knocking men out left and right without even trying. His sword, Thor's, continues to effortlessly beat members of Askeladd's crew with his bare hands. Even Bjorn, second in command, who's in a blind rage after consuming a berserker mushroom, doesn't stand a chance. The other ship attempts to board Thor when Bjorn's unconscious body flies towards them, breaking one of the gangplanks. This is quickly followed by Thor jumping back to his ship, drawing his sword, and destroying the other gangplank. He threatens the entire crew. They either give up and leave, or they all die to protect the kids. Thor identifies the leader, Askeladd, challenging him to a duel. If he wins, they leave him alone. If Askeladd can beat him, he can take what he wants. He accepts. But before they start, Thorfinn throws a tantrum, revealing his identity as Thor's son. Askeladd cuts the rope on the mast. Dropping the sail as a distraction to get a surprise attack. Too shallow, the sword barely scratches. Thor's Askeladd is able to block his attacks after noticing his sword is in bad shape. Thinking Thor is trying to destroy it, he tries to break the sword first, but it's all going according to plan. Thor's sword breaks, and Askeladd swings wide, finding himself disarmed with his own sword at his neck. Falling for Thor's trap, Askeladd asks why he wasted his talents as a master warrior for 15 years, to which Thor explains he isn't a true warrior because a true warrior doesn't need a sword when Askeladd asks him to become the leader of his group. No one laughs when he says he was joking when Bjorn wakes up and screams that this isn't the time to be joking around. Suddenly jumping onto Thor's ship and taking Thorfinn hostage, Askeladd refuses to honor the duel despite losing, and Thor refuses to kill him. But as soon as Askeladd looks like he'll do the honorable thing, he signals for his archers on the cliff to fire. Lighting up Thor's body with arrows without flinching, Thor calmly asks Askeladd to honor his promise and tells Leif to bring his head to the leader of the Yams. Vikings then turn to Bjorn, demanding that he release his son. Askeladd is surprised to find that none of his crew died. They take one of their ships, but they notice Thorfinn has stowed away on it, screaming and cursing them. He vows to kill Askeladd and avenge his father. The Vikings became restless while sailing to the meeting place to receive payment for Thor's assassination. Assuming Thorfinn died from thirst or starvation, they don't bother to check on him. Upon leaving the boat, Thorfinn witnesses the Viking raided the village, leaving no one alive. He sneaks into Askeladd's room but is unable to kill the man in his sleep, saying he would never do something so cowardly. So, the next day, he challenges Askeladd to a duel instead. A kick to the stomach resulted in an almost instant loss. Starving and alone, Thorfinn attempts to survive in the wild, growing weaker by the day. Back in Iceland, Leif returns with Thor's chest and all his belongings intact. Well, almost. This sword remains in two pieces, the blade separated from the hilt. Leif swears he will find Thorfinn, regardless of how many years it takes. Ylva refuses to show her grief, distracting herself with chores and work until Helga tells her it's enough. She needs to rest, and she can't hide from her feelings forever. Ylva breaks down in her mother's arms. Thorfinn continues to survive in the woods, practicing using a sword and becoming obsessed with revenge one night while scraping marrow. Out of bones, a wolf appears. Thorfinn hears the advice Askeladd gave him echoing in his head. Don't let the sword swing him around. He pulls out his father's dagger and kills the wolf as it lunges at him trying to hunt rabbits. Thorfinn realizes he can throw the knife instead of trying to catch them while hunting on foot. As the Vikings get ready to sail, Thorfinn appears out of the woods, challenging Askeladd to another duel. Thorfinn is promised this duel if he can achieve something on the battlefield.
Take you